Hey, look what happened. Is this crazy?
The world is facing new uncertainties following Donald Trump's election victory and rising global tensions. To gain deeper insights into these pressing issues, we sit down with Mr. George Yeo Yong-boon, former Minister for Foreign Affairs of Singapore, during his visit to Beijing this November.
He's been a government minister in Singapore for over 20 years.
Is one of the most sought-after speakers and thought leaders on the Asia regional and global stage.
In this interview, we delve into the potential tariff hikes under Trump's new term, the South China Sea tensions, the rise of the Global South, and the role of Asian wisdom in fostering peace.
First of all, thank you so much for speaking with us, especially given your short stay in Beijing.
Okay, let's talk about our region. Like people say, it's the center of Asians. But the region still faces some turbulence or even tensions, right?
Yeah. We can take South China Sea, for example. China, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia all have competing claims over territory in the South China Sea. But the Philippines seem to have taken a much more aggressive actions, such as enacting laws to claim territories, grounded ships in disputed waters, and even working with Western media to paint itself as the victim. Why is the Philippines escalating tensions?
In 2016, a tribunal under UNCLOS made a judgment against China. China was outmaneuvered because they had legal experts who played a legal game against China. China, when it acceded to UNCLOS, made it clear that it would not agree to compulsory arbitration. The Philippines, with the help of American lawyers, took China to compulsory arbitration. So China said, no, I'm not taking part. So what did they do? They said, okay, if you don't want to take part, then I will appoint judges on your behalf, and I will make your case on your behalf. Not surprisingly, China lost. When after Double Tenth, Lai Ching-te made a speech which was offensive to China, and China conducted naval exercises all around Taiwan, China could have walked into Taiwan and taken Taiwan. And there was nothing the US could do about it. China did not. Because that's not China's policy. China prefers the fruit to ripen on its own and not to pluck it. If you pluck it, it's sour. But if it ripens on its own, it'll be a very sweet fruit. So this is also a message to the Philippines. Do you really want to fight? Can you win? The Filipinos know they cannot win. But at the same time, they feel it's unfair that China's 9-dash line comes right up to the horizon. They're saying, just because I was not yet born, so these waters, which my fishermen used to fish in, all belong to China. So they're not happy. Because the Americans say they had no island in the South China Sea. So the current issue is the Americans are left behind on an island, some air defense system, the Typhoon system, which China objects to because they can cover China. And originally, it was supposed to be a temporary deployment. Now the Philippines are keeping it there. And the reason is because China is preventing the Filipinos from bringing in material to Renaijiao. So they're very unhappy, you see. So they feel that they can't fight China. So the only way is to drag in the US. So this is a game the Filipinos are playing. The danger for the Filipinos is this, that you think you can make use of the Americans, but in the end, instead of the Americans playing on your chessboard, you become a pawn on the American chessboard. And I hope in the Philippines there'll be wisdom in how they manage this problem with China.
Are we entering an era of great power competition?
Well, we have been entering such an era for some time. When the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a short period when it was unipolar, with the US being dominant everywhere. But it's no longer the case, and the world is becoming more and more multipolar. The US, of course, is worried about losing its dominance. I tell my American friends, they shouldn't worry too much, because even in a multipolar world, the US will be the first among equals. There's a Latin phrase for this. It's called primus inter pares, first among equals. So the Americans need not worry that they will lose their position as the first among equals. In any case, China doesn't want to be the first among equals. China is quite happy to look after its own people, to be an important country with influence, but it doesn't want China to become like an America, taking in large numbers of foreigners and having Beijing and Shanghai looking like Paris and New York. China doesn't want this. The US doesn't understand this. It thinks that China wants to be like the US. They are wrong.
But will there be conflicts? Are we going to see a hot war? Because if we look at the history, China-US had much more cooperative relationship back in the 1990s. What caused the change?
America has a tradition of responding to challenges by force. China is capable of being warlike. But China in its long history knows that it is not wise to be warlike. In Sun Tzu Bing Fa, it's very clear. Once you begin a war, it has a dynamic of its own. You have to prepare for war so that you will have peace. But you should always try to avoid war, because war is very expensive. War injures human beings. War is very costly for ordinary people. You will bring a lot of hardship. So wherever you can, avoid war. China's approach is this. If we have good relations, I buy more from you, I invest more in you. But if our relations are not good, then I will buy less and I will invest less. This may be called economic coercion, but it's equal is willing buyer, willing seller. It is economics. So that's China's approach. And it's learned in this long history that it is better to use economic policy, to use interests as a basis of relationship than to use military force. Because even if you win a war, even if you defeat an enemy, you have not solved the problem. In fact, the problem may have only just begun. The US doesn't understand this. It thinks that China, when it becomes bigger, will behave like other Western imperial powers when they were strong and colonize and dominate. This is not to say that China will not become strong and influential, but it will be strong and influential in a different way.
Yeah, you just mentioned the economics, and the economic ties was like a cornerstone of China-US relations. But now it seems this cornerstone is shaking. Like the Trump win the president, and people are saying, well, will this be a second trade war? How do you see this kind of trade war rhetoric?
Trump is worried that America has lost its manufacturing capability and wants to recover some of it. I think China should help America. Because if America loses the ability to manufacture, it will feel very insecure. Then its actions will be emotional. It's better if China helps itself by helping America. Not to help America to threaten China, but to help Americans in their daily livelihood. But today, many of those who say win-win is not possible is because in their minds, China is such a demon. China behaves so badly that there's no way you can negotiate with China. I don't think they know China. And it is interesting that at this point in time, Chinese leaders and officials understand America more than American leaders and officials understand China. You may think that's good for China. I don't think so. I think that's also not good for China. It's better that both sides are rational and negotiate on the basis of knowledge.
As you mentioned, China has been demonizing the West, and the Western media has added fuel to the fire. The US House has even passed a bill allocating $1.6 billion for anti-China propaganda. And so if the warmongering rhetoric continues, would it become a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Information warfare is an inevitable part of international politics, because every country will want the media to reflect its point of view more strongly than other points of view to gain an advantage. For a long time, the Western media has dominated the international media. Now, China has built up its international media, so has other countries, and the Western media no longer has the monopoly position which it once had, but it still has it. And in order to strengthen the competitive position against China, they have been spending a lot of money to demonize China. This is natural. We must expect this. But what is dangerous is their own people are deceived because they read the same media. And they now believe their media to be telling the truth and giving all the facts, when some of it is not true and many facts are not there, and some of the things they report are not factual. The mood in America is very anti-China. But if you listen to them, many of them, not all of them, but many of them, know very little about China. They talk about Taiwan. But if you ask them where is Kaohsiung or Jiayi, or even to identify on a map where is Taiwan, many of them have difficulty. They have strong views about Xinjiang. Do they really know Xinjiang? I think once they are in positions of responsibility and they have to negotiate, they will have to deepen their knowledge.
Yeah. And one interesting phenomenon we observed is like the globalization. Once was led by the West and promoted by the West, but now you can tell, no matter it's EU or US, seems are moving towards more protectionist behaviors. But China says we want to open, we want to trade with global countries. Why China is moving more, promoting globalization, and why the West seems against this trend?
Because of politics. If you are growing, if you are strong, yes, you want free trade because you can hold yourself, you can compete. But when you are weak, you're afraid that trade will take away jobs, that some sectors in your economy will be adversely affected. So the fact that Western countries have turned protectionistic, the fact that the WTO, which America led in globalization, is now turning the other way, is a sign of US insecurity about its own capability. And people feel insecure about their own capability, they begin to imagine all kinds of things about their adversaries. And then their behavior turns inwards, becomes small-hearted, narrow-minded. This is the case in many Western countries today. It's not that China has become wise and they've become stupid. No. It's because China is now feeling strong and capable, that it can compete, therefore it's happy to open up.
European Union countries have agreed to impose new tariffs of up to 35% on electric cars from China.
You always get overcapacity. You always get overproduction.
Can you explain us what does overcapacity means and why there's sudden rise on tariff?
Well, overcapacity is an argument you use when others are able to sell products in your market much more cheaply than you can produce them. So you say, how can you sell products to me at such a low price when I cannot produce them at this price? Surely you must be subsidizing these products in one way or another. But the explanation is really productivity. China is more productive in manufacturing than any other country on earth, which is why China accounts for maybe over 30% of global manufacturing. And in many sectors, like in shipbuilding, like in, say, clothing, no country can approach China by a long shot, which is why companies like Shein and TikTok and Temu can sell in China at a very low price, because the cost of manufacturing in China is very low. Of course, sometimes it's because of state policy, but it's really because these industries are very competitive in China, very competitive, cutthroat. So the costs are brought down to the minimum. But the easy explanation is, because you have too much capacity, you're subsidizing, and you're throwing this capacity at us. This is an argument which should be made to the WTO. Then the WTO has experts in this area to see whether the lower cost is because of greater productivity or because of state subsidies. There are tribunals in the WTO. Why are the Americans preventing the appointment of judges to tribunals? Because they are afraid that these tribunals will rule against them. China is supporting it. China is saying, look, if you accuse me of this, take me to the WTO. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I'm right, you are wrong. But they are afraid.
There's also another argument. They said Trump's win marks the end of liberal democracy. Do you believe in this narrative? China and the US is a kind of authoritarianism versus democracy?
Western liberal democracy has become illiberal. And what they need to do is to go back to true liberal democracy, which is the acceptance of diversity. That culturally we're different, and that human history has always been about diverse human groups trying different ways to organize production and security and finding different paths to the future. And liberal democracy should have a broad mind and a big heart. So liberal democracy is really a flower of Western civilization. It's not part of Chinese tradition, because the Chinese state and Chinese civilization has always been, from Qing Shi Huang, much more centralized. It's a different story. I don't think China should be a liberal democracy. China will break up if it becomes a liberal democracy. But China has its own way of harmonizing differences, of creating a family. In a multipolar world, people will be less impressed by Western views because they can see that the West has double standards. China should not be too concerned about how others judge China by their standards. China should be judged by its own standards against its own history. And in the end, you look at the livelihood of ordinary people. Do they feel safe? Are people enthusiastic? How is their spirit?
As you said, it's a multipolar world, and we can see the rise of global south. And this is quite a new concept, but now China's leadership is talking this term. What do you see the role global south can be in this kind of competition area?
No, the global south is not a new idea. There's a feeling that the Western tide has reached its limit, and the developing world is now making progress and want to find their own way to the future. China is an inspiration to them because China, without adopting Western systems or methods, have found a way to the future. Not that they want to follow China's way, but if China can find its own way, we too can find our own way. The former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, a few months ago in Ethiopia at some conference, he said, let us be frank, Western institutions do not work well in Africa. The boundaries of countries in Africa were all drawn in Europe. They're not natural boundaries. So there are tribes on both sides. There are groupings of tribes who might have had historical hatreds of each other, but now they're one nation. So if you say one man, one vote, I'll say, which tribe is he? I'll vote for him, whether or not he's a good person. So democracy becomes just a game. And when things break down, the army comes in. And they say, well, we'll restore democracy. But in the end, they become corrupt and they make money. And they want to stay in power using force. Then countries go through this cycle. Africa, in the end, must develop its own future, must do what Deng Xiaoping said. There is no precedent. You feel your own way across the river, stone by stone. And if China has crossed the river, I too can cross the river. I too will feel my stones. And this is what the Global South movement has become, that there are multiple pathways into the future. And people ahead of you are prepared to hold your hand and help you go forward. You no longer have to feel that the Western way is the only way. And in fact, they know that those who try the Western way, some of them have drowned.